Now I'm delighted to say our guest is with us this morning from Hagley Hall, Lord Cobham. We were actually just talking there about the cricket, weren't we?
We were.
What a day that was yesterday, my word.
Absolutely fantastic. I was doing something else yesterday morning, playing golf to be honest, and came in at lunchtime and found they were all out. Fantastic performance.
I was going to say, were you leaving affairs of a state to one side, but
Oh,
you were
Lord,
doing
yes.
something rather better. You were playing golf.
Well, cricket is extremely important in the family. We've been at it for, 250 years, I suppose. And my dad was captain of Worcestershire back one day, so we grew up with a cricket ball in one hand and a bat in the other.
Which was your forte then, the bat or the ball?
Once upon a life, when I was a slightly different shape, I was a fast bowler. I started arriving at the other end before the ball did, and I thought it was time to give up.
But you enjoyed it, and now the pleasure is in sitting and watching.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So to Hagley Hall, I mean, a beautiful building, but boy, it must be some work.
It was interesting. When Johnny, my brother, died in 2006, and we had faced the decision as to whether to take it on or not, it occasioned some considerable depth of conversation between me and my wife. We lived in London all our lives. But we decided to give it a go, and we gave it 5 or 6 years to see if we could get the finances turned around, which weren't particularly strong. And also there'd been an awful lot of maintenance that hadn't been done over the last 30 or 40 years, which we had to get to grips with and try and work out how we could finance that. So there was a lot to be done.
So when the specialists put in front of you and said, "Why, Your Lordship, this is what's got to be done," did you go, all of that?
Yes, I think I knew what had to be done. I don't think it takes specialists when you've got 36 buckets keeping the water out around the house. I remember our architect was looking at the roof rather glumly and noticed that there was a saucepan stuck over a particular hole, which had bulged in the asphalt that the roof was. We're always burning the place down, and the last time we'd burnt it was 1925, and my grandfather hadn't been able to afford to put the proper roof back on. But flat roofs may be very good in Tuscany, but they're not great on the slopes of the Clent Hills. And so it was really quite damp. But it was a Le Creuset saucepan, I guess.
I didn't think it would be anything else, for goodness sake, yes. I mean, you say that the roof was a factor and the leaking water. Were there any major structural work that had to be done?
Yes, we had to replace a lot of the stonework on the house. It was made out of the most wonderful but very soft Bromsgrove stone. We're not quarrying at Bromsgrove anymore, so we had to find a good match, which was up in Staffordshire, and replaced quite a large chunk. All the balustrading had to be redone, and the perron, which is the stairs in front of the house, had to be redone. It was only being held together, I think, by the Virginia creeper.
Really? Because I mean, it's a beautiful looking property, isn't it?
Oh, it's lovely. But the worst of it was the when they started measuring it all up, they discovered that the pediment, which is a great heavy triangular piece on top of the perron, was starting to move and starting to lean forwards, which I have to say, given that we do a lot of weddings, shed a whole new light on any just cause or impediment if the bride happened to be standing underneath it when it finally fell. But that's all stabilized now.
I'm kind of in the back of my mind, I'm thinking this probably wouldn't have been very cheap.
No, but we had huge help, and I can't say enough for what we had out of English Heritage and the support we had out of English Heritage, and indeed when we got round to the park from Natural England.
We were talking a little earlier about how you gave yourself this plan. It's a kind of curious situation, isn't it, that you get the job, as it were, but it means that a member of the family has died for you to become the viscount.
Yes, but I suppose it was ever thus. So I mean, my brother had let me know that he was very ill a couple of years before he died. I have to say, I'd always thought it was more likely to fall on my son than myself, but simply because I didn't figure that he was going to pass quite as early as he did. So it came as a bit of a shock.
But you can't. It's not a job you can prepare for, really, is it?
Not really. And an awful lot of it is just getting a feel for heritage and what you're doing. I had no idea of half the history of the place, or the family for that matter, when I came over here. And everyone expects you to know instantly all the facts, figures, and all the rest of it. And of course you don't. So it was a big learning curve for the first 2 or 3 years, while you catch up with just who your ancestors are.
Because I suppose you obviously had been to Hagley Hall many times, but you were almost a visitor, weren't you, even though you were part of the family?
That's right. I mean, of course, I lived there till off and on till I was married, really. But along with spells in Canada and spells in New Zealand and in Northern Ireland. So it was a sort of on-off experience there. And then when Johnny was there, of course, I was a guest when we came to stay. So you have a very different kind of experience.
Did you have good memories of childhood there?
Oh, yes. I mean, what's not to like? There were 7 brothers and sisters, so we were pretty much a community unto ourselves. Huge area to play in, lots of space. It was a tremendous place to live. Yeah, great fun.
Were you quite happy with the fact that you were not the senior son and Johnny was going to be the one who got the job, and then maybe you after that?
I made him not only happy, I think I was greatly relieved. It gave me a tremendous freedom to live a life the way I wanted to. I emigrated to Canada when I was 19, spent 5 or 6 years over there, which is great fun. Adored it. Came back when I got married, and then lived in London till 2006. Having fun, building a business, and a career. And so it was really very much an end-of-career option to take on a Hagley. Because I was 60 when it came down.
Was it I mean, not that you had any say in it really, but I mean, was it an easy choice? I mean, was it one you would have taken?
I think it's one that you will inevitably lean towards because you feel a certain weight of history looking over your shoulder. But I think it's still, in this day and age, something that you've got to be prepared to talk about with those nearest and dearest to you before you do it. So I think you can get yourself into terrible trouble if you make that kind of decision without.
Yes, I mean, you said that you and your wife sat and agonized over it. Was it a difficult decision? Because what was the alternative?
Well, the alternative, of course, is to say, well, actually, it's beyond repair, and it'll be better off as a country club or whatever. It's quite a big thing to take on if you're looking at really quite big 7-figure numbers of debt and maintenance deficit and all the rest of it. But it was worth, certainly, I mean, there were assets there. So although the debt was heavy and the income was light, there were enough assets to certainly give us a 5 or 6 year run at it to see if we could actually turn the finance around. And we were very fortunate in that some land that had been planning since 1993 came up for development. And that has more or less set the finances back on a, well, certainly more stable basis.
Because presumably there are people who enjoy coming and having the weddings there and corporate days and all the rest of it. That doesn't pay all the bills, does it?
Oh no, it gives you a modest contribution, but you're looking at several hundreds of thousands a year in order to keep the house going. That maybe covers 15% of that. Then what we do on the letting stables and the old woodyard covers probably another 40%. And you just have to go on building, run 5 or 6 little businesses.
And saying to yourself, I should have stayed in London. Lord Cobham, we're talking about running Hagley Hall. And it's kind of easy, I suppose, to stand back, and you said about all your childhood memories and all the rest of it. Once you went in there and you found the cooking utensils catching the drips of water and things, is it a situation that sometimes right, we've fixed that, we've repaired that, and then 24 hours later somebody knocks on your door and says, excuse me, but?
Oh, it's ongoing. It has to be. I mean, the house has been around for 250 years, and I suppose one just has to expect to have these things thrown at you. For example, last year we sorted out the central heating. Before, when we turned it on, I think they threw a party in Abu Dhabi. I mean, it burnt oil like there was no tomorrow. And we put in a wood chip burner, which works very well. So well, in fact, that all the furniture dried out and started falling to bits. So now I've got a very major bill for restoring some of the heritage furniture that we've got in the house, which we weren't expecting. So there's always something coming at you from one angle or another. But that just goes with the territory.
Of course. Was there ever a moment when you and your wife sat down and thought, right, are we going to take it on or aren't we?
Oh, there was, yeah. Right at the beginning when we discussed it. Because it was quite a life change, lifestyle change. I'd lived and worked all my life in London, and we'd built up quite a nice business, actually, which we'd sold. I was retiring from it. And looking forward to a retirement rather different to the one that we've got now. But we decided that it was worth giving it a go, and we've done that, and we've been very lucky. I've been very well advised by lots of people, and I was very lucky also to have a brother-in-law to work with who actually knew what he was doing when it came to land management and that sort of thing, which certainly I didn't know much about.
You, of course, had a greater attachment to the house because you were born and brought up there. I mean, from your wife's point of view, it was a lovely place to go, I'm sure, but did she think, well, this is a bit different to what I'm used to, and do I really want this?
Well, I think a bit different to what she expected. I mean, we were looking forward, as I say, to a comfortable retirement somewhere or other, building gardens and that sort of thing. We weren't really expecting to take on Hagley. But having taken it on, she's done a tremendous job in pulling it together. In fact, the new visitors centre that we're putting in at the moment is very much her project.
I was about to say, she's actively involved, is she, with you in
oh, yes.
what you do? Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Very difficult in a marriage not to be actively involved.
Yeah. I mean, on a day-to-day basis, I mean, the image, I suppose, always is that you can sort of walk around and think, oh, this is mine, but I don't suppose you have time to do that, do you?
No, and of course you don't ever think all this is mine. You're only a caretaker during the time that God gives you to pass it on. You know, it's not the sort of thing, you don't ever look at it and say, gosh, if I sell this, I can go and buy a place in Saint-Tropez or whatever, or buy a new Ferrari or whatever.
What would you have done if Hagley hadn't suddenly become yours, do you think?
Well, I think we'd probably have retired to a house in the country, probably not a million miles away from an airfield somewhere. My passion is flying and gliding, and done a lot of that, a lot of travelling around. But who knows? You don't ever look back on anything. If you take something on, you just move on with it. Maybe I'd have fallen into a bottle. I honestly don't know.
It, of course, next week is the glorious 12th, isn't it? Is that a date on your calendar these days?
No. I shot for years and thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm a great supporter of country pursuits generally. But I hung my gun up a few years ago when I realised pheasants were smarter than I was, I think. And getting out of bed on a cold winter's morning was, there were better things to be doing.
And in a word, are you in favour of fox hunting? Would it ever come back, do you think?
Yes, I've never hunted myself, but I think it's crazy to try and rule the countryside from the suburbs.
I mean, one of the things is once you get inside Hagley Hall, there is some beautiful furniture and beautiful furnishings, aren't there?
Well, again, we're very lucky. I think Hagley's probably best known for the plasterwork, which was done by Vasali. And in fact, one of the plaques is actually signed by Vasali, which is very rare. It feels a bit like sitting inside a sort of Wedgwood cake box sometimes, but it's very beautiful.
Do you ever kind of feel that you want to go and sit down, say, in the library, which I know is another beautiful building, and just look around the room, just to be in that room?
Not only think about it, I go and do it. It always amazes me that the permanence, and it's wonderful actually sitting there. There's old Alexander Pope, who's been presiding over things since he was painted from his life.
There were other still Chippendale furniture in the house?
Wonderful furnishing. Not a lot of Chippendale, a bit. And don't ask me the others because it's not one of the ones I've studied yet, Bob.
Fair
but one of these days I'll get it right.
Yeah. And what about the standard artwork? I mean, there's a Van Dyck there, is that right?
Van Dyck. There's still some really very good artwork, some wonderful portraits, and of course the City of Birmingham Museum owns at least the contents of one of the main rooms, the tapestry room, which went in a rather sensible arrangement under which you can donate things to the country in lieu of tax. And frankly, if we hadn't been able to do that when my father died, I don't think Hagley would exist now. But in return for that, you give access to the public 60 days a year.
And of course, one of the last things that your late brother Johnny had to do, he had to sell some stuff off as well. I mean, that must have been painful.
He sold a bit off, and that's always painful. And in all honesty, I sold, when I moved in, I sold half a dozen pictures. Simply because the debt was so significant that it was not really sustainable. The other thing that enabled us to stay was the fact that interest rates came down, and as low as they have. I've been blindingly lucky. I mean, I'd love to say I'd organised it, but I've been extremely fortunate.
Two future American presidents, when I was doing my research, they came to the house in its early days, didn't they? 1786, I think it was. They were they touring the country sort of looking for great ideas of properties to copy in America?
Well, they were doing it, I believe, a sort of garden tour. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. And it was, Thomas Jefferson, I think, was the ambassador in France. And they visited a lot of the major houses and parks in the country. And John Adams was kind enough to write home and say that Blenheim, Stowe and Hagley were magnificent. So I'm very happy being put into that kind of category.
And why wouldn't you be? Now, there's also a connection which I had never heard about before, but with the gunpowder plot as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, as I've always said, never let a Littleton loose with anything remotely explosive. On that occasion, after an unsuccessful foray into politics in the Essex Rebellion, which on a scale of 1 to 10 ranks about 12 in incompetence, John Littleton lost his life in the Tower, not from being hung, drawn or quartered for that matter, but simply out of one of the plagues that you got in the Tower at the time. But then his brother got himself involved in the gunpowder plot and tried to dry out what was left of the gunpowder around the fire at Holbeach, which had disastrous consequences. And so they moved from Holbeach, which is just in Swinford, to Hagley.
Yeah. Oh dear, oh dear.
And
the rest as they
is
say.
history. Yeah.
when people come in, because for all that television or film will say to you, you do absolutely have to have people on hand just to make sure that nothing is changed, marked, altered, damaged, or anything else.
Yes, but that's pretty much the same whether you're holding a wedding or whether you've got a film company, and you really have to just keep an eye on things.
Are weddings popular these days?
Yes, been a bit quieter for us the last couple of years, but we're still very keen on them and enjoyed it. Excuse me, I just got a cramp in my leg. Oh, never mind. I'll just stretch my leg out without kicking it with a bit of luck. There we go. Yeah. Yes, and we love having weddings. We're doing about 20 this year, I think, which is great. We'd prefer to be doing probably 10 more.
And I presume that some of the corporate stuff will be sort of people having clay pigeon shooting days and things like that?
Not so much now. We do have corporate days, but now that we're not using the park, the park is under a huge program of restoration at the moment, and has been for the last 2 or 3 years, and trying to restore it back to the 18th century ideal. So we haven't been having the sort of days in the park which were for four-wheel drive driving and that sort of thing.
And obviously, and I'm guessing you probably enjoyed this as a boy when you were there, you went up and explored the follies that are on the estate. Are there 2, are there? Is that right?
I've got 9 listed buildings.
9? Wow.
And the key follies, we've been going a huge program of restoration. The one that a lot of your viewers will know is the obelisk on top of the hill, which I have to say when we moved in was very much on its last legs. It had a huge crack running down the side of it. And when we did start working on it, we weren't allowed to work in winds of more than about 15 miles an hour on the basis it was that much on its last legs. But with the help of Natural England, that was the first major restoration that we did in the park. And so now it is standing proud, still with a little bit of a bend in it.
Yeah. Well, things like that important to you and to maintaining Hagley Hall as it is?
Well, given that the house was built for the park, not the other way around, I think the park is the most exciting, but it's also the most fundamental thing at Hagley. The house is beautiful, but the house is only really an added decoration for the park, where all the other listed buildings are.
One thing I haven't asked you about so far is politics, because I see you smile immediately. Because a lot of people, they enjoy their politics and they get involved. It's not for you?
No, and certainly not for me. Though I take a passing interest in obviously what's going on, as does everyone else. But the family hasn't had a huge success in politics over the years. We almost inevitably got on the wrong side of everything for about 50 years, from 1600 to 1650. The Tower of London was pretty much a sort of London residence, as was the Sloane Club to anybody else.
We've talked quite a bit about repairs and having to do things. Is it like painting the Forth Row Bridge? Once you get to what you think's the end of it, you've got to go back and start again?
I don't know. I think it's probably the cycle is a bit longer than the Forth Row Bridge. You very rarely have to do the same thing twice in a lifetime. I think the average span for a room decoration is probably about 40 years. So, but one stateroom is going to run to close to 6 figures to restore or redecorate.
And I suppose there's always the concern and the worry of things like dry rot and all these other things that you can get in old properties like this.
Yes, and we've had dry rot. Rather fascinatingly, they've got dogs now who come around and sniff it out, and they're incredibly efficient. They can smell it, and the rot hound comes around.
Well. Do you go around the house sometimes and and you find little nooks and crannies that you don't even remember or didn't even know were there?
Yes, no, that certainly happens. Not that often nowadays. I think we've been into most of them, and we had to have the house very, very closely surveyed before we replaced the stonework and the roof back a few years ago.
I'm just trying to imagine how you go about getting an insurance policy done for a building like this.
Well, I think there are specialists who do it. It's not that difficult. It's pretty frightening, the numbers that you're talking.
I can imagine.
Because the replacement value of a place like Hagley is probably about 5 times what you might be able to sell it for.
Wow. And how much might you sell it for? I mean, were it on the market?
I suspect if it was on the market, you might sell it for 8 million, 9 million, something like that. I think you'd be jolly lucky to get it.
It is, of course.
That's the whole.
Yeah. It is, of course, a Grade 2 listed building, isn't it?
Grade 1.
Grade 1?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my apologies, yes. So, I mean, that really has got a sort of big blanket around it, hasn't it?
Oh, yes, and rightly so. I think these bits of heritage are incredibly important. But heritage is only worth something if the next generations can take something out of it.
When you've got people there on corporate days or people just visiting, do you sort of try and go around incognito and just see what they're saying and see what they're doing, just to pick up feedback? Because I suppose if they fill it in a book, it's going to be pretty much the same, isn't it? Yeah.
Not really. I do quite a lot of tours myself, partly because I'm still trying to learn and get everything right, to the amusement of a very super bunch of guides. But and I get a fair bit of feedback from that. And I also like talking locally. And you pick up an awful lot of very interesting anecdotal stories about the family and from people. If you're talking to people who've got great memories, both of the park and the house of the family.
And I'm guessing that probably the American visitors are the most interesting, are they?
No, I wouldn't say so. I would say the Americans are great fun, and they have a great interest. But of course, we've got a very close connection with New Zealand, in that my great-great-grandfather was chairman of the Canterbury Commission, which started the first settlements in Canterbury, New Zealand. And so my dad was Governor General in New Zealand, so we have a lot of New Zealanders come through, and we love seeing them.
When you're doing your visitor, this way, stand here, watch this bit, when you're going around the hall, do you think that people are surprised to see you doing it?
No, I don't think so. And I think one of the important things when you're doing it is to try and put the human side of it. There's so many interesting stories about the people. The picture is only a sort of passing reflection. It's like doing a PowerPoint presentation. Once you get it right, you get used to moving from picture to picture, but tying them all together with the human stories that go around them, which are much more interesting than paint on canvas.
Are people, do they have a sort of an expectation of you? I mean, do you find them sort of standing there looking and thinking, oh, this is what he's like, this is how he is, oh, isn't it interesting to listen to? Because they have a preconceived idea of what you will be like.
I don't know. I have enough trouble trying to look at myself in the mirror without trying to figure out how other people are figuring me out. I think it's, you say things as you see them, and if you start worrying too much about what other people are thinking, you'll cease to be able to think yourself at all.
The society has changed, attitudes have changed so much, haven't they? And yet, you're proving that somewhere like Hagley Hall still is important to an awful lot of people, not just you within the family, obviously, but to a lot of other people in a far wider circle.
Oh yes, and I think it's important to remember also that the heritage assets of the country are a huge draw. That it's the houses and the parks that bring huge numbers of visitors to the UK every year. And unless we look after them, we're going to miss out on that, which would be serious.
And your visitor centre is on the way. I do thank you for being with us this morning, Lord Cobham, from Hagley Hall. It's been a pleasure. I must just tell you this, he did say I could call him Chris, and I haven't. Chris, thank you very much.